Maybe we can start off with how you've been. I know that you had quite the last few years have been, I don't want to say a challenge because that's an understatement, but maybe you want to elaborate for the listeners who may not know your story as of recent, and we can kind of transition from there.
It was February of 19. I was about halfway into prep. I had like 7 shows planned for 19. My goal really was multi-pronged. I really wanted to do classic and NPC and see how well I could fare. You know, I felt like I had pretty good chances in like the over 45, the national level. So I wanted to give it a shot. Obviously, until Classic came around, it really wasn't realistic for a natural to, especially a heavyweight natural, to be able to compete at a national level and do anything in open bodybuilding or whatever you want to call it. So I wanted to do that, but then also do, you know, some IPE shows, you know, maybe WNBF. You know, I had like 7 or 8 shows kind of planned for the docket. It was early in the year, so it wasn't really a concrete. Started developing flu symptoms, essentially. I thought I had a nasty flu, and I thought that's really all it was. But essentially, first time around, I had flu-like symptoms, but I had this weird swelling on my left arm. I thought it was actually a bug bite, like a spider bite, because there was like a sore that I thought was a bug bite and my arm was red, but that actually wasn't what I was worried about. It was just this horrendous fever. So I went to like a primary health. I thought they would just put me on antibiotics for the flu complications. I thought maybe I had bronchitis, whatever. But she had basically immediately sent me to the ER because she pointed out that the arm looked like it was infected. And there was like red streaks going towards my heart, which indicates possibility of blood infection, sepsis, all that fun stuff. I really didn't think that much of it, but I drove myself about 20 miles to St. Luke's. And by the time I got there, I barely could stay conscious, honestly. I got way worse than that 20, 30 minutes. And they admitted me, and they thought at first it was just the literally loose stuff and all that. But my white cells were almost 0, lower than cancer patients that are on chemo. Like my white blood cell count was virtually non-existent. I think it was like a 70, and normal is above 1,500. Like you're probably sitting here with a 6,000 white blood cell count. My neutrophils were under 100, well under 100. I don't remember the exact number. So they basically admitted me to the cancer ward because it's the only one that be protected, where they have certain policies to protect from infection, because any infection could have basically killed me at that point. They basically said they didn't know what the hell was going on. And I went home and they said, you know, in 2 to 3 weeks, maybe find a specialist, which again, you know, I kind of figured it was a bite and I had a reaction and whatever. Well, 2 weeks passed and basically I had flu-like symptoms again, but they came on super fast. And basically within Thursday, I literally lifted. Remember, I did an upper body lift. I literally drove myself home, and suddenly I remember telling my wife, man, I feel like I'm getting a fever again. Literally overnight, it got horrendous. My wife came home from work. She's a teacher, and basically saw me and said, we're going right to the ER. So we went to the ER, and my memory basically fades. I vaguely remember my son, who's 19 now, helping me to the car. And I vaguely remember that. I don't remember much after getting there. Initially, they just thought I was sick, right? But essentially, they did a bunch of blood work. And in the interim of a few hours, I just started swelling in places. My legs started just swelling. And I don't remember any of this. I don't have any recollection. I was probably in and out of consciousness, but I don't remember anything. Well, I remember a few little things, but not much. But basically, my leg started swelling, and over the next day, they started like removing chunks of my leg that was basically infected, but it was infected from the inside, right? Not externally. They removed chunks of my right leg. They removed a little piece of my left soleus. a little segment of my upper clavicular fiber. So when I do like progress, like pictures now, probably looks like a cut, but there's a little divot in my upper pec that was like the size of a sausage, the surgeon basically said. So my whole body was just infected from the inside. I went septic on a Saturday night. So literally one day a day and a half, I went septic and flatlined for over 6 minutes. Normally at 4.5, they call it good. It's over and done. One of the doctors came in and I had all the young residents. They were all second, third year residents that I pretty much had. And I got to know them all really well afterwards. But she basically came in and they were like, should we call it? And she was like, well, as healthy as it is, let's give it a shot. And they went another 2 minutes and resuscitated me. Well, they didn't resuscitate. I didn't come back conscious. They got me a heart rate again. I stayed unconscious for 5 days. About 8 hours later, they removed my leg because they knew that was killing me. That basically the infection everywhere in my body was killing me because your organs have to obviously move all that dead tissue. I had a 20-some thousand lactate level on that initial blood test, which basically means you should be dead because normal is like 3,000. Your body is moving dead tissue. So your body only has limited capability to do that. So they removed my leg. I don't know if that's when they removed the chunk from my chest or calf, or if that was earlier. I really don't know. I have over a week of no memory. So at that point, that was a Sunday morning. I didn't wake up till Thursday, I believe. I was supposed to wake up like Monday. So at that point, they figured I very well could have brain damage or no brain activity at all. My kidneys had stopped. I was on dialysis. They had completely shut down. My heart, which flatlined for 6 minutes, they were concerned of dead, possibly congestive heart failure or damaged heart in general. All my organs essentially had stopped. I was intubated. When I woke up, I couldn't breathe on my own. I thought when I woke up that I was going to be dead very soon. I don't know how you can know that or think that because I had no knowledge of any of this happening, right? The last I knew, I just had a fever. To be like you having a fever and then you wake up a week later, I didn't know it was a week later. To me, it could have been 5 minutes or it could have been 10 years. I had no knowledge of that. But I woke up pretty frantic because I don't know that I knew that my leg was gone or if I knew much of anything, but I had wires everywhere. I was in there for 80 days, in and out of the ICU for 80 days. I had 25 surgeries roughly. My leg required surgery about every 3 days to wash out the dead tissue and to try to get it to heal because it wasn't just an amputation like if somebody got in a car wreck. It was from a Clostridium septicum, which is a bacteria that isn't just flesh eating, it's muscle eating. They had no known survivors in the national database, which means they didn't know how to treat it because nobody made it to the hospital. Usually it kills you within 8 hours and people never even make it. They get a flu-like symptoms, they're dead. They believed I probably survived simply because I had enough muscle to eat. Normally you don't have much muscle and enough muscle. It eats it, your organs shut down, it's game over. And they believe I just simply had enough muscle to feed it long enough.
So bodybuilding almost saved you at that point. Like the fact that you were so muscular, it almost like kind of saved you in that moment, no?
My doctors unequivocally said that's exactly what saved me. There's no doubt in their mind. But it also was it was a almost impossible situation because they had no idea how to treat it. I was listed as terminal for over a month. I would hear nurses outside my room saying that he'll be dead soon, essentially. They didn't know you hear that because they think you're passed out. They don't think you're conscious and you're coming in and out of consciousness and all the drugs and all the... It started to get better, then it got worse at about 40 days in because I was bleeding out internally. Things just didn't get better. It sounds a little more obvious now, but they really didn't know why I wasn't getting better. At first, when I was first in there, they were like, oh, what supplements does he take? And what is he, a Reuter? And he maybe injected. Yeah, because Reuters inject into their upper pec and into their soleus. And I mean, that doesn't make any sense. But what did I inject with like 40 dirty needles or something at once? They just had no idea. So they were jumping at everything. They wanted me to my wife to bring in all the supplements I take, which, are creatine and citrulline and multivitamins and omegas. You know what I mean? Like they're not super fancy, crazy stuff, obviously, which annoyed me because the whole time I'm like, that's not it, guys. Move on. Just move on. That's not it. Let's try to find a reasonable answer and not like whatever this is. I weighed under 130 pounds at the end of this.
And for those listening, you compete as a heavyweight, right? So if you were weighing 130 pounds, what
17 on stage around 212-ish was about what I was like at IPE Worlds. The lowest my weight ever got was about 200, but not stage weight, like low weights, deep in a prep with really low carbs, you know what I mean? I was about 215 when this happened, probably, 10 to 12 pounds away from contest-ish, basically.
And off-season weight?
I tried to stay, reasonably lean around 230-ish morning weight, around there. Earlier in my career, I competed at a heavier, or I go heavier in my off season, but in that range. So I had lost, 15, and I probably had 15 to go, basically.
Do they know what causes that?
So Clostridium septicum is just, everybody has those bacterias, but they're not allowed in the bloodstream. So that seepage through that is what caused it to enter out of that contained area. Your bowels have all that nasty bacteria, but they're contained. That's why there's a lot of times I think people will hear about somebody just dying in their sleep. It's this kind of stuff that people just die and they don't really know why, because what are they going to do? Like cut the person apart? It's like, a heart virus type of death. There's a lot of people that die of this kind of stuff. You just don't know because they're dead. And what's the point? You know what I mean? And nobody really knows. And you're not going to devote that much medical attention to try to figure out, the mechanism. There's people on my Facebook, there's a little girl, something similar happened with her appendix. She's had tons of surgeries. Luckily, she hasn't had sepsis, else she'd probably be dead, because sepsis alone kills, half the people that have it, not by itself. But over time, luckily, my kidneys recovered. So the dialysis thing faded away after, I think I had 5 or 6 times, which they had no idea if it would. So my kidneys recovered. My heart seems to have no issues. Really, I'm worse than I was before, except missing a leg.
I couldn't even fathom the story you're telling me now. It's like, how has that influenced your life? Forget bodybuilding for a second, but what your outlook on life, has it changed from before to now? Like, how some people are contemplating, like they contemplate death and life and all these things, but how has that influenced you specifically?
It's pretty hard to really express that because it changes everything. I battle because I'm a pretty high amputee. So in other words, just prosthetic stuff is extraordinarily difficult. I've been battling that. I have a prosthetic I wear in my upper body lifts. Even that part of it is very difficult to deal with. I'm dealing with another prosthetic company that's more of a specialist with high amputees to get one, and hopefully so I can compete again, right? But, there's a million things I can't do that everybody else does. It sounds like you're a big complainer because, everybody has certain things they can't do. But I have a 6-year-old. I have 2 almost grown kids also, but I have a 6-year-old, and I can't do a million things that I could with my older kids. You know what I mean? You're suddenly reserved to a life that's extraordinarily limited. Things most people can't comprehend. Like, I was a big movie goer before. It's a pain in my butt. I really don't want to go to a movie and hobble around and go through all that to go to a movie. And there's certain things, yes, you could do them. You could. But the amount of discomfort you have to go through to do them makes it not worth it. People complain about the pandemic. That's just my life all the time. I can tell you right now, I leave the house so often that when I do, I feel like the world has changed when I do. Like there's a bunch of new buildings because it's usually, unless it's for a kid's event or something, there's really no point for me to do it. And because it changes those type of things, the way you perceive other people's complaints can be very cynical, which I try not to be. But when people complain about their boo-boos, I kind of sprained my hammy, or, oh, my knee hurts a little bit. Be glad you got a knee, and you're human. You're going to have boo-boos. You're human. You're going to have issues. Just be glad that you're still able to do most everything you wanted to within a reasonable framework. I have a ton of clients and a lot of people I coach, and I have to check that because I can't be that cynical about everybody's concerns, because that's just their perception now, and I have to be open to that, and I can't be that critical. But it makes it hard to understand how a lot of people think, honestly, what the things a lot of people complain about. And the first year, probably, I had pretty much nonstop nightmares. When you're in an ICU that long, you get all kinds of weird symptoms and weird paranoias. They have a name for it, but when you're in an ICU that long, you become like a paranoid delusion. You don't ever sleep. It's like being in a torture camp for 80 days. Every single day is honestly pure torture. I got to the point where I was going to surgery every other day, right? It was just normal. Like, oh, surgery. Okay. Oh, I'm bleeding out. I flatlined 3 different times. I didn't even talk about that. There was one time where my blood volume was so low that they were pulling me out to go to a surgery, and suddenly my blood pressure was zeroed out. I'm looking up at the monitor and watching my blood pressure go to 30/15. I told the nurse, well, that's not normal. And they hit the oh shit alarm on it, and all the doctors come running and they're shooting you with epinephrine. And I'm just laying there going, well, probably dead. Oh, well. You get to that point where you're like, so I die. Oh, well. It really gets like watching an episode of ER, and that's all it is. my perception of death is way different than other people's. There were a lot of times where I just was like, well, if I die, okay, that might be better. Might be a lot easier, hell of a lot easier, a lot less pain, right? So yeah, it changes your whole perception of everything, of absolutely everything.
Do you think that before this situation happened, you took certain things for granted almost? Like me being healthy now, it's like when I hear this story, it's like, dude, why were you complaining about your tight shoulder trap muscle 5 hours ago? And then when you're saying this, it's like, wow, like I'm grateful. You know what I mean? And I know you were just bringing this up about how you have clients that probably complain about similar things or mention similar things. And it's hard not to be like, come on, man, like, who are you talking to here, right?
I mean, I was at that point, I was already 45, 46 years old. And, I got a bad car wreck in 2015 and had to have wrist surgery. And I've had various things happen that, made me have, I think, a pretty healthy perspective on things. I used to always tell people, ironically, it's so ironic, all my friends, the inside joke was that, hey, you're doing good in your contest prep, don't get hit by a car though. Like anything can happen. My joke was it could be going good, but I could walk outside and get hit by a train. That was always the inside joke with me, is that I'm like, you don't know. You could be going just fine, and a week out, boom, something can happen. So not necessarily death, but like, what if you slip on the pavement and like rip your knee out while your show's out? Like a million things. That was always an inside joke with me because I'm fully aware of how vulnerable we are to that. But ironically, I'd also say things like, hey, I'm going to keep driving this truck until a wheel falls off. Well, the wheel fell off. You know what I mean? So yes and no. I mean, I think I always had a fairly healthy approach to that, but you just don't know how bad shit can get. You just don't know. And we reserve that, we reserve that to people that are 80 or 85 or 90. We reserve that to, oh, Michael J. Fox, he has that Parkinson's, Montel Williams, he has that, or so-and-so, but it's not me, and I'm young. And young could be, I'm 50, I'm 55, I'm young. Well, the thing about it is we aren't connected or aware of the dead because they're dead. So we don't talk about them because they're dead. We have our funeral, we have our sorrow, but we move on. And that's only really close people that died to us. The other people, we don't really spend a whole lot of time with the people that are down and out and miserable and hurt and diseased or dead. We spend most of the time with the healthy. So it makes us very unaware of how much of it is out there and how we're a lot closer to it than we realize. Not everybody's just going to make it to 80 and then all of a sudden they die in their sleep. That's not going to happen for the majority of us. This is not.
This is like reality, especially I think when you feel like you're invincible as a young guy who lifts and who competes and it feels like they're on top of the world, they're healthy. You don't think about these things. I mean, you did because you had some scenarios like you had mentioned, which kind of put you in check along the way. Obviously, not to the extent of your the most recent events you went through, but yeah, man, like I think it's good for people to hear this because it can offer some perspective on just life and the little things that we take for granted, I
think also what it's done in terms of my training, and obviously this is more direct to the topic, but is that I was in that same boat with people where, you get a little bit of tennis elbow or some golfer's elbow, or your knees irritated a little bit, and you feel like, oh, I can't compete or I can't make good gains, because people go, oh, maybe I should just go and do some other sport, that's a funny thing anyways. Why people are like, oh, I can't do bodybuilding because it injures me. Well, I hate to tell you, any sport you're going to do is going to probably cause more injury than that, not less. Go play some basketball and see how that knee feels. You know what I mean? Like literally it's called a golfer's elbow because it's called from golf, like your tennis elbow. I tell you, it wasn't just from doing your rows. That comes from tennis.
Yeah.
I see all the time people like, oh, I'm not going to do that bodybuilding because it's so hard in your body. Well, it's kind of a bunch of crap, number one, as far as all these things go, because there's so many ways you can get results. There's so many mechanisms and movements you can do to work around that. So for me, my big question coming back is that, I can't do classic deadlifts. I do one-legged RDLs, right? Squats are out. I live on a leg press, right? Can I make gains that will even put me close to where I was at before, let alone beyond that? And nobody just wants to train to get back to where they were before even. That's even depressing, And even the things I can do, when you bench press one-legged, I use it for prosthetic, but you don't have the same leg drive, right? How will that be? There's all kinds of things. When I do row motions, it changes when you're on one leg. And a lot of them, because I'm such a high amputee, a lot of machines you can't even get on with the prosthetic. They need to be one-legged. So even your upper body training is completely different. Am I going to be able to have productive training? And even with what I've had, I have no doubt that this is by far the biggest I've ever been. I have never been Not even close. So, I look at that and I go, well, it makes me even kind of giggle more about everybody throwing everything away because of these minor little ailments that are perfectly normal. I tell you what, you lift hard, you're going to have an achy shoulder at times. You're going to have jacked up traps sometimes. You're going to need those massages. At some point, you're probably going to have an achy knee. You're going to have about everything at some point. And you just got to learn to either lighten the loads a bit, change your movement patterns, take a week off, whatever. There's a million ways. It doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're human. That's just something that I already knew, but it just changes the perception because, the bottom line is stimulus. And there's a lot of ways for most every body part to get stimulus without staying with that exact pattern of movement that got you in trouble in the first place, or just isn't possible because of whatever issue you have. You just got to be creative. You can't be so emotional that you throw everything away because it didn't go perfectly for you. Really, that's like what a toddler does, right? That's what a little kid does. You know what I mean? Our ego tends to pop out and tend to act like little kids. At some point, you've got to ditch that stuff. Or you can just quit all out. You can just do that. You can quit because you wanted to, not because you had to. And just say that, hey, it wasn't worth it to me anymore. I'd rather not do it. I want to go do something else. That's fine. But don't quit because you say it's not possible or that there aren't ways to get to that same result. That's just not factual. That's just simply you wanting to find a way to quit the same way everybody does for some reason when they don't even have injuries, right? Like, oh, it's not good because I'm getting married and I can't compete because I'm married, or I can't compete because I have children, or I can't compete because my job's too hard, or whatever. Those are all just excuses too. So the one leg is an excuse too. If I say I can't do it because I have one leg, that's no different. It really isn't in the end. I got all the other body parts. Why not build those? I'm missing 16%. Well, I got 84. So in the end, I know your podcasts are about longevity and all that, and there's a million things you can go into talking about that. But in the end, being able to improve with longevity is the only way I can put it is it's giving a shit like you did when you started it when you're 30 years in. That's what it is. That way you cared when you started at 19, whatever age. For me, I was like 12, but whatever age that is. Started at 28, you had all that passion, you had all that drive, you were all into it. It's about having that, however many years later we're talking about. And most people don't. And that's really what it is. If you could become that cynical old man and you're 56 years old, you're sitting around talking about yesterday, then you're not going to be able to improve today. And that's really what it boils down to me. It's about passion. You'll find the answer to your problem if you have passion. You won't ever find the answer if you have a place of vacancy in your heart with it. And that's really what it comes down to.
The love for the process, how important is that? Because you, in literally the blink of an eye, all that hard work gone. Like, that's what it felt like. And I saw that picture. I think you were in a wheelchair and you were doing the lat pull downs, and you were probably, if I had to guess, in the 135-pound range. Like, that's what it looked like.
Yeah.
And it's like, how in your right mind from that point do you go from there to where you are now? If you don't love the process, it's like all that hard work was just vanished. If you want to elaborate on that.
It's a complicated question and I'm not sure how to answer it, but sorry. It's a little choked up sometimes, but
No, you're good.
It established kind of a level of respect with everybody that they just let me do whatever I wanted to at that point. I think because they expected me to be dead so far before that, so many times. At some point, I think they said, this guy's terminal. We're going to let him do whatever the hell he wants. That was earlier on, not at the point of that picture, but probably just 3 weeks after it. And at that point, I think they were just like, if this guy can endure what he's done, then I don't have the guts to tell him no. So yeah, I went down and worked out almost every day. And I would, even at that point, it started about then, I was still not even in the rehab unit for another 3 weeks probably. And then the rehab unit's in the hospital, whether you do 3 hours of rehab a day, essentially. I was there for about 10 days. But I basically said, wheel me down to the gym. And I basically had 10 exercises on this old circuit thing, and I would have them put a strap on my ankle that was sitting in a corner. It was like this little ankle strap sitting dusty and never been used that I had to put on my ankle and explain them how to wheel the wheelchair around so I could do leg extension and leg curls off the pulley system. I had them get the wheelchair backwards, and then the lady had to like go into the wheelchair and wrap it on my ankles so I could do extensions, and you have to hold the wheelchair so it wouldn't slide, you know. There was a chest and lat pull down. There was actually a dip machine and a few other things, right? Triceps, biceps, whatever. But I'd spend like an hour in there pretty much every day, even with like no food at that point because I couldn't eat because it was after the stomach surgery and I could hardly eat anything at that point. I was eating probably 800 calories a day. They still had me in an IV to give me like mostly what I needed. But I guess because for me, lifting in general, whether you call it bodybuilding or not, for me, it's always been about a place that I can go to that I can block out the rest of the world in general. It just kind of goes back to my childhood, and it was my solace. It was my place to kind of hide in a way. And in sport, it was my magic ticket to a lot of success because I was one of the few kids that lifted, you know, and it was always this thing that I could do sort of better than everybody else. So when I was down and out, it was always a place for me to go. And there was never a time when I was more down and out than that. So it was just my place of like, hey, when I can't control the world, this is something I can always run to. I didn't know what I could gain back. I really didn't, but it didn't almost matter at that point. The gain was to be able to do the one thing I could really do well, to be able to do something with it again, to feel like I didn't lose, you know, I lost a leg and I lost 100 pounds of muscle and I lost my health. Because at that point, they actually thought, because of my blood results, even then, that I very well might have bone marrow cancer. And I had to do bone biopsies after that. They really didn't know. There was no doubt, even when I left the hospital, that I very well could be dead soon, that I very well could have something that caused that neutrophil level to go that low, because they were not buying that it was just that one little carcinoid. So there was a fear that I was terminal effect still long term. So to me, it was like, I told my wife all the time, I'd not be alive in a year. I very well could be gone in a year. So I'm just going to burn this shit out as much as I can. That's really what I would tell her all the time. I'm going to do absolutely everything I can living the way I did before, if not better than the way I did it before. And there's no guarantee of muscle gain. There's no guarantee that I'm going to be out of the hospital consistently. And there's no guarantee I'm even going to be alive anymore. So I'm just going to burn the candle as hard as I can.
Did a part of you take it like a challenge almost to see, okay, I'm at this, like the lowest of the lowest, relatively speaking. Did you almost find enjoyment in that? Or was it not even about that? It was just more like because you love it and you just wanted to do the thing that you loved again?
There was zero enjoyment for a long time because I was sleeping 16 hours a day. I would literally go to sleep at 8:30, get up at 11 the next day. And my wife worked at the middle school a mile away. I wasn't going to, there's no way I was going to go to a commercial gym. My gym I had to be shut down. I had a studio. I had to shut it down because I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 months. I lost my gym. All my stuff was in storage. I put an office in my guest room where I would meet with some of my clients and consult, but not a lot because I couldn't handle it. So she would come back right when school got out, pick me up, pick me back, and I'd work out at the junior high for about a year. And then the pandemic hit. So I had to work out at a buddy's gym because they wouldn't even let me do it at the school. But for the first year, I worked out with feeble equipment in this little junior high. And it was incredibly hard just to get there and have the energy to do anything. I would sit in a chair at this little table and just be like, I would just shake my head being like, I don't know how the hell I'm going to get through this. And I would literally be so weak that I would have the lightest weight on every machine. Literally no weight, just pull the pin. I benched the bar, and that wasn't easy when I first went back. So there's no enjoyment of that. There's no enjoyment when you're like, yeah, I could deadlift 700 before I went in. Now I can't even bend over to grab a bar. I couldn't do a pull-up. I couldn't raise my arm up. I literally could not physically. I had to go like this to raise my arm. I couldn't wash my hair. I had to go like this. My shoulders were so messed up, I couldn't even raise them. When you're in a hospital bed for 70 days, it destroys your body. Absolutely destroys your body. So it was absolute hell for a long time. I
just saw you lift up your arm, and the story you're telling me now to where you are now, folks, like the videos are going to come out. So it's remarkable to see just the little bits that I am of you. Of course, I see the photos that you've been putting up. When you hear about, like, for example, obviously this is a different category of bodybuilding, but Ronnie Coleman's kind of story with everything that he had gone through with his 9 million surgeries or whatnot. And then he's like still doing his thing. But it seems like for you, because it's natural bodybuilding, you'd love to compete again, which is that something that you're preparing for currently?
It really depends on if this works out with this other prosthetic company. Then I hope that it happens in July, where I can get into a different socket fit. That's a really complicated thing. But if I can get where I can move around adequately, then I'll do it. My goal is really that I want to do NPC and the NGA, and really the NGA because that's where it started for me. When I started, there wasn't a lot else. And the NGA universe, I know to some people, it's not like it was 20 years ago, you know, where a lot of people view like WNBF or whatever is bigger. And maybe it is, whatever. again, my perception is different with that stuff. I don't really care about if people view me as the greatest and I need to go to the biggest shows to be seen as like the best natural guy around. I don't care about any of that anymore. There was a point where I did, you want to build some kind of legacy and a name, and that stuff doesn't matter to me at all. It means nothing to me. The NGA universe is where it started for me. It was my second pro show, and I competed. It was my second pro show, and the winner was Philip. Philip Ricardo was 1, Cleveland Thomas was 2. Number 3 was Earl Schneider. Number 4 was David Lovelace. I think I was 6. I don't remember who was 5. That was my second show, and it just has a special spot for me. I want to do that show, and I want to do the NPC and qualify for the over 50, a national level, over 50 in classic, and probably bodybuilding too, and see how I do against the over 50 juicers. And I think, honestly, if I'm being unbiased, really, I don't think in the over 50 class, I'm going to give up size to anybody, quite frankly. They might dock me down with the one leg. It is what it is, If they decide that, I don't have anything against it, Maybe I would do the same if I was a judge. I don't know. Hopefully, though, if I can get where I want to conditioning-wise, I think a lot of control is still in my own hands, really. I think I have a capability to do very well at that level, actually. But we'll see. I have to be able to move around and pose and do the things I feel like I need to do to be competent. So we'll see. If it doesn't happen this year, then it's next year. But, I'm about 20 weeks into a diet. I'm getting just to the point where I need to start grinding, where it actually starts to get hard, basically. It's been pretty easy at this point. But we'll see. It's a carrot that I dangle, And the thing is, in the end, I'm a bodybuilder regardless. I've done over 100 shows, pretty much every federation, I think. I guess not the DFAC. I guess that's one of the few I haven't done. Pretty much everything else I think I've done. And like I said, I'm a bodybuilder regardless because I just love this stuff. And I will only compete if I feel like I can elevate where I was before. And of course, I won't have a leg. Outside of that, though, if I can be better than I was before, then I'll do it. If I don't feel like the rest of me can be quite a bit better than before, then I won't.
And you feel like the rest of you is much better, or that's what you said, right?
When I look at picture, yes. I think that in certain areas, I'm just way beyond where I was. Legs always was something that would lean out late in a prep for me. But in the context of where that's even right now, I know that my quads and hams are noticeably bigger than they were then, and much stronger too. But that's something that I'll really know when I get that last, 10, 12 off. Because like I said, that's an area that just leans out for most people later on, really. Will that just be overshadowed by the leg? That's for other people to decide, really. You know what I mean? There's, like I said, there's things under your control and there's things that aren't. And I think for what I can control, I can literally say I have not only done my best, I've emptied the tank constantly on a daily basis, more than I ever did before. That's what I think people need to ask themselves if they want to have longevity. Being 50 is not a big deal. Being 50 is just not a big deal. Losing limbs, I will say that can feel like a pretty big deal. But I don't understand the whole mourning over being 50. Now, if I was a football player or something, or a high impact sport, yeah. But in bodybuilding, I really don't understand it, honestly.
Well, you have a bunch of guys that are competing well past 50 still, right? I mean, you got Jeff Alberts, you got Philip Ricardo, you got Kyoshi Moody's coming back after his, challenges that he went through. You have Marshall Johnson, who competed almost up until 60, right? It's wild.
Like last week.
Oh, he competed last week.
62 years old. Yeah.
Get out. I didn't see that.
Or 2 weeks. I don't know which. A week or two ago. Yeah,
No
Alberto.
way.
It popped up on my feed because somebody, I thought it was old at first, but it's not. It's like 2 weeks ago. And then Alberto posted something on Instagram too. 62 years old.
He came out of the shadows. When I was talking to Philip, he had said, no, I'm not doing that. Or that's what Philip had told me, like Marshall's not in bodybuilding anymore. And he kind of just surprised everyone, I guess, or?
Yes, so. In 2012 at the Universe, he was right at the beginning of that comeback. I competed against him right at the very beginning of that. I think he was like 51 or 52 or whatever. Yeah, you're right, 51 or 52. I've been in a lot of shows with Marshall, but the list is pretty short. But I think the list is short because of choice, not because of anything else. And then that's fine. People get other interests. They get bored of it. They don't like it. Whatever. That's fine. But the chronology of life, thinking that you're just going to degrade that much, is kind of silly. I think that's people's lack of intellectual flexing. If you're going to be lazy mentally, where you're not willing to learn and change, it's not 1985 anymore, bro. If you're not willing to change and adapt and evolve, then you are going to get worse, because those little things are going to happen. Like I said before, the tweaked knee, the whatever, those things are going to happen. And if you still think, oh, I got a squat, else I can't make gains, and you push through that, you're going to end yourself. You're going to blow that knee out. You're going to have an injury that's way beyond doing anything. You can't do leg press now. You can't do whatever, as opposed to the little tweak you had, you were a meathead about. And I think the biggest thing is people need to make sure their wisdom grows directly with age. It usually doesn't. It usually just doesn't. People just almost get dumber. I mean, really, they do. It's like they're 45 and they're talking about the training practices from 1992, like fitness is so new. It's so new, really. If you think of it, it's as new as computers. And I don't mean fitness like, I'm talking like the Greeks. I'm talking like bodybuilding and lifting with this artificial modality, the weights in this sense. It's really like, if you look at computers, really kind of evolving from, the mid 70s, right? Well, you think back to bodybuilding. I mean, it was pretty infantile in 1975. Like, look at the gyms Arnold lifted and you're like, whoa, my gosh, that looks like a museum for sure. And of course, we had bodybuilding somewhat before that, right? We had John Grimmick and Steve Reeves, and we have Greg Park. But then you're talking about really archaic. You're talking about the stuff John Grimmick did in his basement, attaching an apparatus to a beam that he snaps and about collapses his whole house onto.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you bring that up, because you have to wonder the longevity of these guys. I don't know where it goes, because those practices, could that really take you that far? Like the way they were doing things, you got to wonder, right? Like these guys quit at an early age. You want to talk about these practices from the 70s. It's like, where's the longevity in that, right?
There isn't, because their equipment sucked. Most cases, you didn't squat. What were you going to do? I mean, I'd be screwed beyond belief. There wouldn't be equipment that would accommodate me. I would be absolutely done in every way, shape, and form. I mean, I can't go do dumbbell bench. I'd lay back and fall off. You know what I mean? I'd have a garbage bench that I probably couldn't even get stability on. I mean, it'd just be ridiculous. It would really be absurd. No matter what my desire would, I'd be massively backtracking. There'd be no way around it. And that's what happens in the normal stage of growth for most people. Even if they did mature and get more wise, they really don't have a way to apply that unless they go and make their own equipment, which I'm sure some of them did. They just created some equipment to make things better, right? But, there's limitations to the ability of people to do that, right? So I think that we're in a place where there's a lot of exponential growth right now with all of it. Now you have all these companies on the internet, you have Frey Fitness, and you had Rogue before, but now you have like a million of them. Like there's just so many different companies and equipment that you can get about anything you want anymore. You can get all these versions that can help your longevity, but you gotta try to make an effort. Most people don't. The first time an obstacle comes up, they're out. Period. That's a passion problem. When usually a passion problem comes from a goal problem. So in other words, their goal, let's say even a bodybuilding, their goal is, I want to be a world champion, man. I want to be the best. Let's say they're a smaller guy. I want to be a lightweight world champion. And that's it. It's the end goal, period. The moment where they think that maybe they don't have the genetics for that, most people don't, right? I mean, world champions or even somebody that can win a pro show is tiny percent. The amount of people that can even go pro in any legitimate pro organization, that's even a tiny percent. But to actually be a good pro, an elite pro, you're talking about tiny, minuscule numbers. A world champion and a legit fed, well, okay, most people are just out, all right? So the moment that happens, they're like, okay, well, I'm out. I can't be a world champion. I'm done. It's a passion problem. You wanted to impress people. That's all it was. You didn't have any real passion for it, ever. And that's really what longevity, again, what I think it boils down to. I think it boils down to wisdom and passion. I think that's it. That's all you need to have longevity.
That's very important, especially for the younger crowd that is listening to this. And an extremely important thing you had mentioned with, I'm not built for this. When little things kind of start to creep up and then they just kind of back away right away. It's like, wait a second, right? That's not how any athlete of any level would approach this. Never mind a world champion, right?
Right. And I would just argue that those goals, again, are most likely about the wrong thing. Any good competitor wants to win. They want to dominate. Anybody is wired that way, but it just has to go deeper than that. Like Philip, I watched a video where he mentioned that he said, I think his words were that he's not the bodybuilder he used to be. And that if he wanted to be better, he knew he was going to have to up his game, essentially, But my point is that he still does it because he's passionate about it. There's a certain level of courage, I think, that comes with saying, if I backslide and people see me differently, then so be it. That's them. They can see me however they want. You know what I mean? I have a certain level of respect for that. I would hope that people have enough passion too, though, to say, I can improve at 51 or 52 also, which I think he does. I mean, I'm not putting words into his mouth.
I'm going to bring this up because it's important. He mentioned that there were some things that he wasn't doing that he know he could have done, which is why his physique wasn't the way it once was, why he felt that way. Like, for example, he wasn't doing certain things training wise with certain levels of intensity. He was kind of going in, just going through the motions and just more focusing on the euphoria of what a workout would give you, almost like general health, as opposed to, I want to go do this at an elite level again. So you might see a very different Philip a couple years from now.
What does that come down to? Passion. There's enjoyment. That's not the same thing. Going to the gym and enjoying it is not the same as saying, I'm going to go in and I'm going to endure some wicked shit. But I'm going to endure some wicked shit with wisdom. Then it gets really murky. Then it gets really complicated, because then you're enduring very calculated. It's intense and wise and calculated in a way that you can progress and not get hurt. And that's a fine freaking line. That has to come with a lot of analyzing your training, a lot of being open and getting help from people, and not living in the past.
You know, it's interesting because you had posted a picture of your arms and you were saying how you don't dedicate like a whole arm day. And maybe that's a genetic strong part for you. I don't know. You can answer this. And the reason I bring this up is because you mentioned calculated intensity, calculated way of approaching this with a certain amount of wisdom so you don't get hurt. It's like a young mind might go in and be like, no, I have to be the best, 20 sets for everything. And it's like, again, wait a second, right? Like, why are you doing it like that? You are going to probably burn yourself out at some point if you continue down that road, right?
Yeah. So in 2013, I believe, I hired Alberto Nunez because I was 40, 41. And I kind of felt like I had done what I could. I really felt like I had won a lot of pro shows, but they were what I would call, medium level, like state pro shows. And like, they weren't the big daddies, you know what I mean? I placed decent at some big shows, and I kind of felt like I was kind of stagnant and kind of had done, not because I was 41, but just because I had already been in it that many years. At that point, I had 8 years as a pro and 15 as an amateur. And I just kind of felt like I needed to have an outside look. And I was also a little bit bored with my own decisions, give or take. I changed things, but like I kind of had gone through the gamut of my own choices, and I wanted to just let somebody else have the reins. And he definitely changed some of my views on things. Certainly got me out of the old bro lifts. Like, he's not a bro lift guy. At least with me, he's not. He's not a we're gonna do back and buys and chest and try and shoulder calf and quad ham, which one day is a quad day, whatever. The old bro lifts. And I was okay with that. I was okay with, it was new, so it was nice. You know what I mean? I was all right with that. And, I started to improve. Imagine that. And a lot of it is I over-dieted. I way over-dieted. I did 8 or 9 shows a year for 8 consecutive years. So 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, wow. 11, 12, and 13, I did about 65 pro shows. And imagine that it was dilapidating my body. After 6, 7, 8, 9 were really good. 10, 11, 12, not, especially 10 and 11, not so good, right? So we brought things way up in 14, but in 17, I had my best year, even after taking a year off. Well, not a year off, but after my wrist took a year to heal. That happened in early 15, and it wasn't really healed till early 16. And even with that, 17 was by far my best year. So anyways, once I came back from this probably about a year ago, maybe not even that long, I started back with Alberto, and we just do Skypes like every 3 or 4 months, not real frequent. If I compete, probably that last 2 months of the grind, I'll hand him the reins so I don't overdo myself, overcook myself, or whatever mistakes we can all make by looking at ourselves too much and not looking at it objectively. So I'm a big fan of that too, that's kind of what I mean by wisdom. Like, be wise enough to know that you're not perfect, like you might have some genetic gifts to the sport. You might have that passion. I have a master's degree in exercise phys, and I have about as much, I think, education you can have in this area, but it doesn't matter. You can't view yourself. You just cannot view yourself objectively. You just can't do it. So he's the one that really reduced my arm training a bunch, because he's like, you got to reduce that and feed the areas that need more, right? So like, I was like, oh, okay, fine with me, because I don't even like training arms. I had some tennis elbow because probably doing too much of it, and I was fine with that. So, we put in a much more back work, way more back work, which I love training back anyways. A lot of specific delt work. It just changed a lot of things. And that's something that, regardless if I'm working with him for that span or not, I still go under that ideology in general. So for me, it's just 2 upper body lifts and 2 lower body lifts a week. That's what it is. After the hospital, it was full body lifts and stuff like that. But I'm just saying that once I'm in a good spot, that's generally speaking what I do. Doesn't mean
4 times a week?
It's 4 times a week. Yeah, 2 uppers, 2 lowers. There's spans where we've done 5 days. When I was trying to get to a 500-pound bench last fall, I was benching 4 days a week. So I was doing 5 lifts where I benched on 4 of them. Once I was done with that little goal, I got to like a 460-ish. We pulled that back to 2. So I'd have like a leg day with bench at the beginning of it or whatever. But in general, it's 4 days. Now they're long, not short lifts. They're not short, but still 3 days off either way.
And before you kind of ran like a typical, 1 day chest, 1 day back kind of thing, 1 day legs, 1 day shoulders.
Like yesterday, my workout was bench, chest flies, T-bar row, a hammer strength high row, a Titan mid row, so 3 back, and a tricep extensions, a seated tricep extension, and a long head bicep movement.
Okay.
There was occlusion. I did occlusion on a few things. Oh, and delt lateral raise, pulley delt laterals. So there was occlusion on a few different movements, mainly some arm occlusion, a little bit of lateral raise occlusion. So rep ranges can get weird, but roughly 3 sets of 12-ish. I actually recently changed it where, because I'm deeper into a diet where I do some high rep stuff thrown in. So like on my back work, I'll have a set of 25 and a set of 15 and a set of 6.
Okay. Like a reverse or like a pyramid, kind of pyramiding up kind of thing.
Yeah. Green pyramid, like on the high row, for example, would be 2.5 plates aside for 25, 3.5 plates aside for 12, and like 4.5 plates aside for 6. Gotcha. But those things always change. My rep ranges do change pretty frequently, and movement patterns change to some degree. But I'm not a big fan of overdoing that. But sometimes, I'll be able to throw a curveball and be like, "Hey, let's do front raises. Let's be weird." In fact, he put front raises on my last lift, and he said, "Yeah." He goes, "I did them." So I'm right here. He goes, yeah, I did them on my blogs, but I didn't post it because I know it's controversial. So
yeah. Oh, man, he's sneaky, man. The announcement is out. He's doing front races, folks. Alberto.
Too much rotator cuff, you're going to hurt your shoulder. You're already getting too much work on front delts. We'll occasionally do little things like that are maybe unorthodox or whatever. But that's the general gist of it, though. But
you're enjoying it. You're enjoying the upper lower kind of style. How long have you been running that for? Like the last few years?
For the most part, since 2013.
Wow. Okay, so that goes to show you, like, people are always looking for like the next thing, the next best thing. It's like you were running a specific thing for almost majority of your career, and then pretty much ran something else for the latter part of your career. It's like 2 things basically. Whereas people are like jumping from full body to this to that. It's like a million things right within like the span of a year, and wonder why they don't get anywhere.
Yeah, I have like periods of different. I said my amateur years from 93 to 2006 was one thing. 2006 to 2013 was another thing, and 2013 to my leg. 2019 was one thing, and this is a whole nother. Really, got to be wise. You have to be wise.
Yep.
So my voice just kind of vaporized.
No problem. Just a quickie. That's a pretty cool setup you got there. I see that's like an art piece of you holding up your the sword.
That was a client of mine made that picture for me, actually. My gym's about 2,500 square feet. I got like 40 pieces of equipment.
Cool.
So like,
is that a home gym?
So I don't know. Is that even?
Wow, that's really cool. Is that like pretty much like your house, or?
I don't even know if I showed it or I just showed you the ceiling. I really don't.
No, I caught it. Is that like a home gym you got set up there, or?
It's a 12-car garage next to our house.
Cool.
It was 2,600 square feet, but we made a whole bathroom, shower, a laundry room. It's got a kitchen in it, little living room, and then most of it's the gym.
Is it open to the public, or is that your own private spot?
If they're my clients, it is. If it's my direct clients, it is. So I have a handful of members, and then my consults I can do over the phone, or I do here.
That's cool.
So a lot of them come here if they want to, or with the pandemic, of course, we did a lot more remote, right? Yeah. Now, and I have some out of town people, so it just depends. But they can come in if they want, basically. So
that's a sweet setup.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice. Like I said, my life would be perfect if I had 2 legs. So I thought my life would be somewhere on an acre of land. We have beautiful lawn and big giant trees. And
I'll tell you this much: you're probably the most incredible natural bodybuilder that ever existed with 1 leg. Like there's no one else. There's nobody else. You're number 1, man.
Hey, man, I do what it takes. If it takes removing a leg to be number 1, I do it.
Number 1, man. You got the gold. You know what I mean? And on a next level too, it's like, how many people can you say would ever. And I know it's not about that for you, but it's just like, it's inspiring, man. It really is. Like when I hear your story, I'm like, dude, like I'm fired up, like about life, just like, and being grateful and reminding myself, like, dude, you're not broken. Whenever like, you got some arm tightness, like that you're complaining, and you think you're the only one because you're oblivious to what's going on in the world almost, because it's just you and yourself, and you don't think, right?
And people have it way worse than me too. Like I guess what I'm saying is I can feel like I'm on some kind of pity, which I get there. I mean, there's, I'm not going to try to act like I don't. I mean, there's times that you're just, it's just like, just like I put on my prosthetic and I'm putting it on 3 times in a lift because it's literally sliding off. My lift takes 3.5 hours to get through. And I'm like, this is just freaking ridiculous. This is like, nobody has to deal with this bullshit, and you agree, and you just, besides, like, why should I work this hard if one day you can go to sleep and wake up and lose another leg? For all I know, I could fall asleep tomorrow and wake up and I'm missing my arms. I mean, for me, that's all it was. It was literally, I had a flu, fell asleep, I woke up, bingo. There's no process. There was no process for me. It was a sleep, awake, gone. So if that can happen, why do this shit? That is how your life can be, then why even do it? There's times where that is very strong with me. That can go 2 ways on that lever. The one way it goes is you just say F it and you sit around and watch Netflix and you sit around and marinate in your bullshit, which I'll tell you right now, that's what almost everybody does. That's why people become drug addicts on this crap. That's what they were worried about with me. My doctor literally in one of our appointments was like that their big concern is drugs, alcohol, drugs, painkillers, whatever, because that's where it goes with a lot of people. And you can go that direction and just your life's over at that point, essentially. You're just a drug addict and you fade away to obscurity and you go around and be miserable with everybody and you're no good to anything. You're not good to your kids, not good to society. You're not really good to anything. Or you can flip it the other way and go, and I don't know how else to put this without doing it as viscerally as I can, where you literally get up every day and you go, fuck that, it's not going to win. It's not going to win. The bacteria is not going to fucking win. The gangrene's not going to win. And that's it, period. And you do whatever it takes, period. Whatever it takes.
This is huge. Like, I'm going to get real here for a second myself, because there's times where like what you're going through, it's not a competition, of course, and everybody's going through their own thing on their own level, because that's all they know. It's relative, right? But sometimes I wake up and I'm like I'm going to die one day. Like, why am I doing all this? And then I think to myself, like, why am I doing all this? But the reality is, it's like, what is the alternative? Like, I love, okay, you broke through some barriers to get to the point where you enjoy lifting more than you did at the beginning of your recovery period. Could you say that?
Oh, God, yes. Yes.
Okay, so there was a point where it's like you didn't know it, but when you look back, it's like there was a reward there for going through what you went through, to be like, hey, I can go in and enjoy this workout better than it was before. That's progress, and in life, that's ideally what we're looking for a lot of things, work, financial. We're looking for progress, right? That's what keeps us, motivated to keep on going. At least that's the way it is for me, and I'm sure it's the way for you, right? And that's where I'm like, okay, I could be like, oh, what's the point of all this? We're just gonna die one day. Like, why am I going to the gym? Why am I going to work? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing that? Because it's better and more enjoyable than, and we've all been there, where we've taken a layoff, where for a certain amount of weeks or certain amount of maybe some, like I think Jeff Alberts was talking about, he had a 4-month layoff. It was the worst thing ever, almost, in terms of like, forget how he looked, just probably how he felt too, right? Yeah. So
there's moments, I have those moments. So there's moments where literally some days I can't even get the prosthetic to go on nearly as well as others. It sounds weird, and it's like sliding around. It's annoying. And those are worst days, and I'm irritated with everything in the gym. And I'm like, I mean, the thing is, this is not all like rosy or anything. I really cannot lift without my wife. I really can't. Mm-hmm. Like when I lay down bench, I have to grab her hand and she leans me back. You don't really realize how your leg changes leverage. If I fall back on a bench, I'm falling back. If you're guessing, you're like just falling back. Just try to get up without using your legs once. Try having one leg and just point your other leg out on a bench. You still have the weight of it and try to sit up with one leg. You got to pull me up. Put my arm out. It's got to pull me up. If I got off that bench every time, the prosthetic would slowly weasel its way off my leg. She's got to load my weights. I can't lift without my wife. Really, like, period. So like there's times where you're like, I never lifted with anybody hardly in my entire life before. I lifted alone in my studio for 16 years by myself in my studio, no workout partners, squatting 500 and deadlifting 600 and benching 400 all the time. No spotter, no safety rack. And I was totally confident with that. Now I literally can't do squat without my wife. So you're like, great. I'm like this little kid, like a toddler, needing my wife. So you go through all kinds of emotions. You just feel like you're a helpless invalid, right? Period. It doesn't matter how my arms are 22 inches. Doesn't matter if I can bench 500 with one leg. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the end. There's moments where you feel like a complete freaking invalid, period. End of story. So there's always going to be that emotion with me. There's always going to be that. But then I think about possible outcomes. And I think about, what if I go do a national level NPC show and I get a pro card? What would that feel like, not only to me, but what would that mean to other people like me? And I don't mean like me being one-legged. I mean like me in a million other ways. What if they have anything that seems like an impossible barrier? Anything. Doesn't matter. It could be irritable bowel. I don't know. It could be anything.
Something. Yeah.
It'd be a traumatic brain injury. You just pointed your head, like, so I thought of that. What it could be.
I was thinking just more mental, like something mentally that's blocking them. So
right. If I can endure the loss of that leg after 100 shows, and I know it doesn't matter how developed the rest of my body is, I know when I see pictures in that, it's going to bug the shit out of me. I'm going to see that. I'm not going to see everything else. I'm going to see that prosthetic and it's going to piss me off no matter what, no matter how freaking shredded I get, no matter how big I get. I'm not going to like what I see. Absolutely guarantee it, period. I know when I look in the mirror, I don't like what I see now. So it's not going to matter then, because there's a lot more of me showing then, right? But then you just think of like, but what could it mean to do it? And then what could it mean if I don't do it? Right? So in other words, I tell myself all the time, don't be a freaking sorrowful little pussy, was the word I was going to use, and literally crawl into your hole because you're a coward, right? Don't be a coward. And that's what it boils down to. And that's kind of an extension of passion. If you quit because of those injuries or you quit because of whatever, it just means that you're kind of an unwise coward to me. You know what I mean? Now, if you quit because you got other things in life that are a bigger priority to you, that's not a coward. That's prioritizing what you think is important. And I understand that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you feel like you're being a bad wife, a bad husband, a bad father, a bad person. If it's making you worse as a person, well, then you got to reassess yourself or reassess how you act when you're in that sport. And that's two different things. That's also being wise, in my opinion. Some people can't handle the sport. They become a worse person in it. And that's wise to understand that about yourself, and move on and do something else that will make you a better person. For me, I absolutely guarantee 1000% bodybuilding makes me a better person. Absolutely, completely, unequivocally, it does. I do not feel like I'm a better person the last 5 years by not being able to do it, at least on a stage. And I feel like I'm more balanced. Besides, balance is gone to me. My life does not have balance. I don't even like that term, but there's no way in my life has any balance to it because of what the leg, how it changed that. I don't have some life where I go on vacations all the time. There aren't a lot of things available to me. So I don't have balance. You work with what you got.
At what point, I wanted to ask you this, because at what point throughout your recovery did you feel like you were able to train? I'm sure it wasn't just, I can now lift again. Was there a point where you're like, I feel like I'm getting somewhere with this again?
There wasn't a moment, because it was very like a slow transition. But I think, when I felt like I was in a position where my body could handle a lot, I could handle a good amount of stimulus, is about when I contacted Alberto, right? Which was probably a year ago, but it was solid 2 years.
2 years.
And when I really felt like I was getting really strong, like really powerful, was probably late, like last October-ish. September, October, November, when I got up where my weight was, higher and, it was a little bit soft. I literally felt like I was making a lot of gains. Like I felt like underneath the fat I had, there was a lot of muscle kind of marinating there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And you hit the 460 bench after the incident, right? Like that was after.
Oh, yeah. Before. No, that was Christmas time, this last Christmas.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, it was the end of November. I weighed about 215 and I thought about competing in it, but it just isn't really that important to me. Hourly is just not a big deal to me. So I told Alberto I just wanted to see what I could do. And then November 25th, I started my diet. So I basically did that about my 50th birthday was the idea, which is November 9th. So I wanted to time it for my birthday. When I am done with this diet, whatever that means, whatever, I really want to break a 500. I think if I can be a one-legged guy at 220, breaking 500 at 51 or 2, that's,
500-pound bench.
That's, again, to me, that's a lot of longevity. You got to keep reassessing goals and keep shooting for something and making it sort of fun, at least. You know what I mean? If you push hard enough, it's not always super fun because grinding at something is more fulfilling. I actually don't really like the word fun.
Right.
It's more of a fulfilling thing. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
So, and if you want to have fulfillment, you're going to have some pain along the way. Fun can come with no pain. Fulfillment really can't. At least I don't think it can. Fulfillment is something done because you knew you endured something that maybe other people wouldn't endure. And enduring something is painful. I mean, just the pain of a set or whatever. It's the pain of like raising your intensity level to a level where other people won't so that you can achieve something. And intensity is painful. You know, we're not wired to do that. We're not wired to be in high intensity. We're wired to lay around on the couch and sleep and eat donuts. When you don't do those actions and you endure those things that allow you to not have those pleasure principles, that's when things get hard. And that's what bodybuilding has always meant to me. It just means that you're willing to endure some crap other people there's no way they would.
Yeah. To end it off, I thought it would be cool because we've been going on for some time. I want to be respectful, of course, Craig. One of your most memorable contests, competing with so many of the legends that you have, and why? I think that would be cool.
That's a rough one. From a level of just seeing a lot of greatness on one stage would be actually, that's ironic. That is really freaking ironic. This is from 2010. I believe it says that, right?
Oh,
so
the IFPA, yes.
That's IFPA 2010. The USA is in Sacramento. And it was an insane lineup. Philip won. Kiyoshi Moody took second. Cleveland Thomas took third. Fourth, I believe, was Panex Pierre, who's a phenomenal bodybuilder. Phenomenal. He's a Serge Nubret kind of body. I don't even remember who was fifth.
Moji Alua was competing there too, right?
Not 2010.
Oh, it might have been the Muscle Mayhem, I'm thinking. Might have been a different show.
I could have it wrong. It's been a while, but I'm pretty sure that's what I was just saying was the top four. I don't think Moji was out the 2010. In my opinion, that was right in Philip's prime. That was right in Kiyoshi's prime. That was right in Cleveland's prime. This was not, none of them were like at the beginning or the end. It was right in that midst of it. And from that memory, I can remember being there going, this is something I'm not going to see all the time. But like 2008 ABA Olympia, where I think is the best I've ever seen Philip. He was just unbelievable there. I mean, just insane. I don't even know how to express it. And in that same year at the NGA Worlds in Atlanta, Cleveland Thomas was just like a little action figure. I stood next to him in the lineup and I can remember turning, looking at him. And when he would flex, like go into like a side chest, I can remember standing there going, I honestly can't believe how he looks. Like on stage, I was like, he'd flex and his glutes would just jump and styrate. And it was just unbelievable. I mean, I think the best I've ever personally seen on stage, either watching on stage or being on, in this case, being on stage with them, the best I've ever seen is 2008 Cleveland and 2008 Philip. And, you know, not to take anything away from like Doug Miller, because I was at his last show, 2014, the Orton. That was before he did Jay Cutler's NPC show, but I didn't watch that. I didn't see him on stage. He was a light heavy and I was a heavy. I didn't see him. I've never actually watched him on stage, but I am counting like Moji and a lot of great guys. But to me, the Mount Rushmore, period, is Cleveland Thomas and Philip, the two best I've ever seen, period. As far as pure size goes, there aren't a lot of guys that honestly feel like were really bigger than me. I mean, Doug Miller was more developed than me for sure. Not bigger necessarily, but more developed, I guess. I mean, I'm sure there's been others, you know, like Kiyoshi's a big dude and stuff. But as far as just having it all, those two guys are it for me, honestly. Glenn is a little underrated, and a lot of people, you know, because he jumped the NPC, they're kind of bitter about him or whatever, which I think is kind of juvenile personally. And I think that he is sometimes overlooked. There's never been a guy in natural bodybuilding that has better symmetry than Cleveland. Never. You're never going to convince me. There's just never going to convince me. I've never seen anybody that can beat his conditioning in natural bodybuilding or his symmetry. In his very best, his conditioning was outlandish too. The package he brought was just absolutely phenomenal, honestly. And I think Philip would probably agree with me. I think he's better than Philip. It's just Philip in his prime, his conditioning was just, all the best guys were here and he was just
one step up. Yeah.
And it was so phenomenal that you just couldn't not say yes to him. His legs were just so ridiculous. His serratus and oblique was so ridiculous. His back, you know, you can even look at it. You can look at him and go, you know, his back's not the biggest, but geez, come on. Like there's shit there that just nobody else had.
Right.
And you can say the same thing about his shoulders. His shoulders were just not that big, you know, they weren't, but it didn't matter because there were just things that were there that you'd never seen before and I've never seen since. I just haven't. And when he did that side chest and those hamstrings and glutes just went, he really, honestly, to me, he covered up a lot of flaws with one quality that was so overwhelmingly dominant. So, like, to me, he has to be the greatest natural bodybuilder, even with the flaws I mentioned.
He was an amazing poser too, right?
Oh, great poser. And he's just a phenomenal bodybuilder. And he did it again and again for a long time. He didn't just do it once. In natural bodybuilding, to have a peak that's 4, 5, 6 years is a long time. A long time, because you got to bring outstanding conditioning every time. So to be at an absolute peak that many times is a big deal, you know, especially in the back then. It wasn't like now either. You didn't take these long layoffs.
Right.
So you did it year after year. From 2000 to 2012, 13, none of this 2-3 year off stuff happened. These guys competed over and over. I did too, because I thought that was normal. Now, we were wrong. It wasn't the best physiological thing to do. We were wrong. But you got to realize, when people can compete at a high level 5, 6, 7 times a year for year after year after year, man, that's a Ken Griffey kind of drawing that the guys think now is just outlandish. And I know that it's not the best thing, and I can probably develop a better physique over those years. But to maintain that level for that long is something you'll never see again, because the guys just don't do it. They don't do it, period.
Thank you so much. Truly grateful for your time. Your story is truly inspiring. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will enjoy this episode for what it is, and hopefully they take something that could help them with their journey. And again, thank you so much. For those listening, thank you for tuning in as always. And until next time.